Hi everyone. So today, welcome first and foremost. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. So today we're gonna kind of do some housekeeping things, I guess. Because it's uh, it's a month till your first paper is due. So I want to give you as much time as possible to get everything done and make it good and everything like that. So I went ahead and posted the paper proposal assignment and the paper assignment so that you could go and look. I made like Word documents explaining what you need to do for each of them. So if you just click on the assignment, then it'll be there, the Word document with the info. So, but I'll also just tell you about it right now. But I hope everybody watches this lecture because it's important. So, just the gist is that your paper will be 46 pages. The first one will be. Second one will be slightly longer. But your first one, 46 pages, due October 15th. That's a Thursday. It'll be due at your scheduled class time. And so that's the big paper. And you'll be choosing a topic basically of your choice, but you will run it by me first. So the way we'll do that is by this paper proposal that's due a week from the time that you're watching this, if you watch it on time. That'll be September 22nd. September 22nd at your scheduled class time. So the paper proposal it's not like a big deal or anything. It's just like a paragraph. So in the paper proposal, I gave some like example paper topics. Like you could take one of Aquinas' 5 ways of proving the existence of God and explain either why it is successful or why it is not successful. Or you could say it would have been successful with this revision. So that's always an option too. If you have like something to add to someone's argument, you can do that totally. So I don't know if people like this or not, but it is kind of vague because I want you to choose what you like and what you're most interested in. But I know that can be hard because sometimes maybe none of it sounds that interesting or like you don't know where to begin. So the best way to find a paper topic is to just go through the chapters that we've read in the book and like read a philosopher and either agree or disagree with him. And it's not, your paper's not just going to be like, I agree with this person, end of story. It should be, this person's position was successful because of this, and this. So you could have, a great way to write your paper would be, you're arguing this point, then you have, so you're arguing this main point, this thesis. You have 3 supporting points for why you're arguing for that thesis. So that would be like the start of 3 sections of your paper. And within each section of your paper, you could have 3 subpoints for each subpoint. So what that could look like would be, you have your introduction, intro, and your introduction should include your thesis, which is, I'm sure that in high school you had to write a thesis for at least English class or whatever. This thesis should just be very simple and clear. That is, once again, our goal. Simplicity and clarity. So, it could be, I will be arguing that ... because ... So you need to, oh gosh, too many. So you need to tell me what you're arguing and basically your main points for why you're arguing for that position. Then you can go to the body of your paper, and you can have main point 1 with 3 subpoints. And I say 3 just because that's like, I don't know, sounds like a good number to me. If you do 2, that's fine. If you might have 4, that's okay. Just make sure that you don't have too many to where it's confusing and muddled, and that you don't have too few to where you're not actually providing evidence for why you believe what you believe. Then maybe you get main point 2 with 3 subpoints. And then main point 3 with 3 subpoints. And then you would end with your conclusion. And your conclusion should just be, always make sure that you restate your thesis. And instead of saying, I will be arguing, you would say, I have shown that, or I have demonstrated that, and explain how you did that. In your intro, you can also say, the way that I will be arguing for this, for whatever, is by first, and then you explain what you're going to be doing in main point 1, and then I will move to, and then you'll explain what you're doing in main point 2, and so on, for however many main points you have. And if you do, let's say, a paragraph for your intro, and then a paragraph for each main point, maybe 2 paragraphs for a couple of the main points, and then a paragraph for your conclusion, done, that's your paper. That would reach 4 to 5 pages easy. So, like, having a formula kind of like that is at least helpful for me. And one thing that I don't mind you doing at all is actually labeling introduction, and then each section under that. I don't want you to label main point 1, but you can say what your main point is and label it. And so that could be like, I hope that makes sense. Let me show you what I mean. Because I know, like, probably in English you don't like have section headings, but in philosophy it makes it more clear, so it's good. So we like anything that makes things clear. So you could write out introduction and then have your paragraph, and then you could write out Anselm's ontological argument. Underline that, and then write your paragraph. So that makes it clear. You don't have to do that, but it is helpful because I think it helps you stay on track, and it helps me follow where you're going and what you're doing. And the way that you write your critical summaries, in some sense, should help you with this, because I want you to start by laying out the philosopher that you're talking about's position. So just lay out what they're arguing. Not word for word, but in your own words, summarize what they're arguing. Then you'll move into your critique of that. So it's kind of similar to that format of the critical summaries, but in the critical summaries, you're allowed to say things like, this reading was challenging for me because, which in this paper, you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be focused on the argument. You're not going to really bring in too much personal experience into it unless you have an example that really proves your point. So it is different than a critical summary because it's more formal, and you're actually trying to prove something. You're not just like giving your thoughts about something. So I hope that that's helpful. You shouldn't say things like, I just really think that he was wrong about this. That doesn't tell me much, and it's not informative. So your statements should be informative, and they should be furthering your thesis. So I said a lot of this in your paper assignment, so hopefully there's some clarity there. If you have any questions, or if you really are having a hard time pinpointing what you want to write about, just email me. But a note on picking your topics: be careful not to choose something too big. You shouldn't say that you're going to argue that God is real or something like that, because that would take billions of pages. So keep it narrow, but not too narrow. You don't want to point to one small point of one of the philosophers we read and nitpick it, because you're not going to have enough material to even finish your paper, probably. Be sure that you hit the page limit, not because I'm a stickler for page limits, but because you can't really accomplish this goal in less than 4 pages. So it just demonstrates that you maybe didn't do it properly. And if you can help it, don't go over 6 pages, because that's just a lot. And a really important skill is learning how to be brief and clear and to the point and thorough. So just, developing those skills. Yeah, and if you have any questions about just paper writing in general, let me know, and we can talk more about it as time goes on and as we get closer to the paper. But be sure to turn in your proposal by a week from today, and I'll let you know if it's good to go or if maybe you need to revise it in some way, and it'll be good. So yeah, paper proposal is just a paragraph. Give me your thesis and maybe your subpoints. That would be great. Nothing too crazy. Just want to know that you have a plan and that you're ready to get going. Because 3 weeks should be a good amount of time to finish your paper. And you'll just turn everything in through Blackboard. So let's see if there's anything I missed about that. I think that's good. Sweet. So this week we are still talking about philosophy of religion, but we're talking about Pascal's wager specifically. So I am interested. I wish that we could, have real class and I could say, how many of you have heard of this before? And then you'd raise your hand and I would say neat or whatever. But we can't do that. So I am curious though, just how many people have heard of Pascal's wager, or at least after you heard it have been like, yeah, I've heard that argument before. So today we're going to start by talking about properly basic beliefs in general, and basically theological epistemology, and then we'll move to talk specifically about Blaise Pascal and his famous wager. So the first question that we're considering in this new chapter is, so in the past chapter we were focused on, is God real? Now the question is it reasonable for me to believe? So just thinking rationally, is it a reasonable thing for me to believe that God exists? And is it reasonable to believe without evidence? So I know this bothered some of you that in the last chapter we didn't really get a great answer. I mean, it could have been a good answer for some and whatever, but there wasn't just this is the answer to the question that we've all been waiting for. It was this could, I mean, maybe you like this answer, maybe you don't, that type of thing. So we acknowledge that, like, there isn't just some evidence that, oh, this is the first time I've heard of that evidence, and now, like, I totally believe, no doubt in my mind, God is real. Not really the case. Probably never will be the case. So then we get the question, well, is it reasonable to believe without evidence? Because we don't have just, like, super, I don't know. I don't want to say super strong evidence. We don't have undoubtable evidence. If that makes sense. Like, you can doubt the evidence. Whereas, like if there's a murder or something and you get someone's fingerprint and it was on the dagger and their blood was also at the scene and all this stuff, like, all that is, maybe that's not like knockdown evidence either, but that's like pretty clear evidence, like, this person murdered this person. And in this case, we don't have like physical evidence. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. We don't have physical evidence. Well, some people would say we do. It's hard to teach sometimes because you want to make sure you're covering all the belief systems. Like, some people could believe that, but who knows? It's all kind of crazy. Anyways, so this chapter is acknowledging that there isn't just like super strong. I did it again. Let me just move on. Let me move on. Is it reasonable to believe without evidence? That is the question. Do we have to have evidence to believe that God exists? Or can it be reasonable to believe that God exists even though we cannot prove reasons for this belief? Now, Anselm had like reasons for thinking that God exists, but it wasn't, I mean, that was all like in his mind. Like, it was a coherent worldview for him, but to call it evidence probably isn't the best way to describe it. So then we must ask, is faith in God's existence ever reasonable at all? So we have, maybe we have this general principle that, so this is a general principle that like sounds true on the surface. That you should not hold a belief unless you can support it. By citing evidence or giving an argument. Okay, so this sounds true. Like, okay, you should not hold a belief unless you can support it. Generally, that sounds like, yeah, that's pretty true. But we have to ask, is this the case always? Or are there exceptions? So can we think of an instance where you believe something but you don't have evidence for it? I'll wait for you to think about that for a sec. Anything you can think about. I'm open to thoughts. So if you really think about it, the answer almost, I mean, it doesn't have to be yes, but it is most likely that the answer is yes, there are exceptions to this rule. As we talked about earlier in the course, I brought up, like, how do you know that you're not just a brain in a vat that's being stimulated with all these sensory experiences, but you're not actually like a real body? How do you know that that's not the case? Well, as I said earlier, like there isn't really much evidence to say that I'm not a brain in a vat. I can't really prove that to you because everything that I prove could just be somebody sticking me with certain stimuli to make me say that or whatever. So, how do I know that I'm not like some little experiment and like nothing's actually real? All that stuff. I mean, I can't really prove that to you. So, we'd accept that as a properly basic belief. This is important because this is what keeps us from skepticism. And skepticism may sound like, ooh, I'm a skeptic, I'm interesting, I don't like believe everything people tell me, which, is good. But like actual philosophical skepticism just means that you don't have any beliefs about anything ever. So, not to dog on skeptics, but like nobody lives like a skeptic believes. So what I mean by that is a skeptic would say, how do I know that this chair is going to continue to hold me up for the rest of this class? Well, I don't know that. It could fall. So, if I was a skeptic and I said that, the skeptic would probably still sit in the chair, right? Like, you can't truly act like a true skeptic at all times. Because you wouldn't do anything ever. Because everything that you do requires some amount of belief. And this is like all philosophers except skeptics believe this. So I feel okay saying this. Like, me taking a step requires the belief that my leg's not going to give out. Or, so belief doesn't have to be like strong, like as in belief in God. It just has to be like, I have this basic little small belief. I have the belief that like the sun will come up tomorrow. Could the sun not come up tomorrow? Yes, I suppose. But I'm not going to live as though that's the case. And nobody does. Nobody lives that way. So to me, that's just telling of skepticism in general that nobody lives like that. So, properly basic beliefs. This is important for us. So, a belief is basic for you if you cannot defend it with an argument. And then, so this is just a basic belief. A belief is basic if you can't defend it with an argument. And then a properly basic I should say a belief is properly basic if it is nonetheless reasonable for you to hold it. Okay, so I can have a different set of basic beliefs than someone else. Because a belief is basic if you can't defend it with an argument. I'm sure I have a lot of basic beliefs. More than probably others. But a belief is properly basic if it's reasonable for you to hold it. So that kind of makes it more, less personal. Like, if something's reasonable, that's less subjective. It makes it more objective. So, a properly basic belief would be something like, I'm not a brain in a vat. That's something that, like, it is reasonable for us to believe that we're actually in this world having these experiences. And there's not really a way to defend it, but it is still very reasonable. An unreasonable basic belief could be something like... I'm trying to think. Maybe I believe that I will wake up to my alarm in the morning. It's unreasonable for me to believe that because I don't always wake up to my alarm in the morning. But it's still something that is basic for me because I can't... I guess I could defend it with an argument. Maybe that's not a great example, but I'm sure you can think of one. So, now we have a few questions about properly basic beliefs. One, are there any properly basic beliefs? I already spoiled this because I think that there are. Most people do. If so, what are the conditions under which a belief is properly basic? So, what makes a belief properly basic? Because I could say a ton of things were properly basic and it not be true. So, what makes something properly basic? And then, does a belief in God satisfy those conditions? So, does belief in God satisfy the conditions of a properly basic belief? So, could it be the case that belief in God is a belief that we can't defend, but that is nonetheless reasonable for us to hold? That's a big question. Because it's important to know, is it reasonable for people to believe in God? We know, like, it's unclear about evidence, whether God actually exists. I mean, you can't just come out and straight prove it. So we need to know, okay, well, since we can't, like, prove it in that way, is it at least reasonable for for people to believe in God? Or is it just totally unreasonable? So this is why this is important. So the question, when is a belief properly basic, or when is it reasonable to believe something that we can't support or defend? Some people have said that a belief is properly basic when its denial is somehow unthinkable. So if I can't even imagine something being another way, then that belief would be basic. So this would kind of undermine the idea of the belief in God being properly basic, because we can imagine atheism. We can imagine that God doesn't exist because atheism exists. So I can think of an atheist worldview, and because of that would make belief in God not properly basic. So if you're going to defend belief in God as a properly basic belief, then your definition can't be that a belief is properly basic when its denial is unthinkable. So we can't have that. And then some people even say that a belief is properly basic when it's psychologically impossible for a human being to doubt it. Kind of a similar thing. But if this were right, then it doesn't help the theist at all. So one thing that Pascal does, and William James, but we won't be reading William James, we'll just be reading Pascal. He separates he separates reasons for belief into epistemic versus practical. So let's erase this and write a little bit more. Okay. So we have reasons for belief. Ooh, I changed pens. And we have epistemic reasons or practical. So here are two examples of these. These are two different arguments making two different claims. So the first one is that imagine that you are one of 5 equally qualified workers. Then, let's see. You all have the same skills and experience. But then you see a study that shows that confident candidates who firmly believe that they will get the job are somewhat more likely to succeed than candidates who are not confident. So, what should you believe about your prospects? You can either believe that you are one of 5 equally qualified candidates, so you probably won't get the job, even if you're very confident and you say, I'm going to get it. It would only improve your chances by like a little bit. So maybe you go from a 25% chance of getting the job to a 20% chance. So it's reasonable epistemically. Epistemic is a variation of the word knowledge. So based on reason alone, it's reasonable to believe that you're not going to get the job. Now, if you look at it from a practical standpoint, if you believe that you're going to get the job, you improve your chances, and that's all that matters. So a rational person does what they can to get what they want, and just so it's like dressing for success. It doesn't like technically improve your chances, but it makes you feel better, which might make you perform better. So in that case, it's reasonable for you to believe that you're going to get the job. So these are two different ways of looking at things. Epistemic versus practical. And what Blaise Pascal does is he looks at belief in the existence of God as practical rather than epistemic. So, if we look at epistemically rational versus practically rational, epistemically rational means that whether it is likely to be true given the evidence, or whether it would be reasonable to hold if one's sole concern was to believe the truth about the issue at hand. So it's very reason-driven. Given evidence, is it reasonable to believe? Practically, it's a little different. Because we could be asking whether holding the belief will have good consequences. So for epistemic, it's given evidence is it reasonable to believe? Practical, will believing have good consequences? I know you can't read any of that, but hopefully it makes you feel like we're in class together, or if there's some. Anyways, so a lot of times these are not mutually exclusive. So it's typically beneficial to hold beliefs that are likely to be true given your evidence. But occasionally they come apart, like in the getting the job example. So, let's see. Making sure I'm not missing anything on this. Yeah, that's basically all I want to say about the introduction to this chapter. So now we can move on to Blaise Pascal. His name might sound familiar because he's very famous. He was a mathematician, physicist, inventor, writer, and theologian. So he kind of covered all the fields. So the SI unit for pressure is Pascal's, right? I think so. And that's named after him because he's so famous. He invented a calculator, which is fascinating. He's so very extremely smart. He was a child prodigy. His biography is pretty interesting, like just learning about who he was and stuff, because he had like a very stark religious experience that made him, I don't know, converted to Christianity, and then I'll tell you about it in a sec. But so Blaise Pascal, he's French. He was born 1623, and died in 1662. So he died very young, which is sad, but back then I guess that's just what it was. So this is from the modern period of philosophy. He is from the modern period of philosophy, if you recall. Now his philosophical work, he more so did like math and science or theology, but and his theology was philosophical, but he didn't write like primarily philosophy. That wasn't necessarily his wheelhouse. So he was Catholic, but he was a Jansenist, which is a particular sect of Catholicism, more closely aligned with Calvinism and kind of Protestantism, because the Jansenists were focused on Augustine's teachings. And if you remember Augustine, we talked about him recently, he focused on God's glory, election, God's holiness, anyways, all these things. So Jansenists really tried to follow Augustine's teachings. That's what made them distinct from other sects of Catholicism. The Jesuits were not fans of the Jansenists because they were more similar to Calvinists, which Catholics and Calvinists didn't typically get along. They probably still don't. So, anyways, that's just interesting. It's not important. So, his dad got really, really sick in 1646. And that's when Blaise Pascal basically became a Christian. And it wasn't until later that he had like a very significant religious experience that like has made him famous. I mean, the other things did. Like, this was a famous conversion is what I'm trying to say. So, November 23rd, 1654, Pascal has this really intense religious experience. And it's not clear, like, what that was. But it was, like, at midnight. It was very intense. And he writes this, this little note. And he ends up sewing it to his coats. And if he changed coats, he would, re-sew the note to his new coat. And it said, I looked it up, it's kind of long, but we got time. I'll go ahead and read it. So, in this little thing, in his little coat, I don't know where it was in his coat, maybe up here, maybe, I don't know. He kept this on him at all times. It says, the year of grace, 1654. Monday, 23rd of November, feast of Saint Clement, Pope and Martyr, and others in the Martyrology. Vigil of Saint Chrysogonus, Martyr, and others. I should have practiced reading hard words before. From about 10:30 at night until midnight. Fire. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not God of the philosophers and of the learned. Certitude, feeling, joy, peace. God of Jesus Christ, my God and your God will be my God. Forgetfulness of the world and of everything except God. He is only found by the ways taught in the gospel. Grandeur of the human soul. Righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you. Joy, 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 tears of joy. I have departed from him. They have forsaken me, the fount of living water. My God, will you leave me? Let me not be separated from him forever. This is eternal life, that they know you, the one true God, and the one that you have sent, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. I left him, I fled him, renounced, crucified. Let me never be separated from him. He is only kept securely by the ways taught in the gospel. Renunciation, total and sweet, complete submission to Jesus Christ and to my director. Eternally enjoy for a day's exercise on the earth. May I not forget your words. Amen. So this is what he kept on him at all times. And I had heard about this before because I had just heard of, I thought that it only said God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and of the learned. I thought that's all it said, but I was wrong. I looked it up. I was like, oh, neat. Yeah, so it's actually interesting because while we're reading Pascal as somewhat of a philosopher, he actually didn't really agree with philosophy in general. Like, he would have just totally replaced philosophy with theology. So, and he says this in the writing that basically this is all folly to those who don't believe. So who are we, Christians, to try and make it make sense to people when it's just going to be folly? So what he's saying there is that in the Bible it talks about how the gospel is foolish to those who are perishing. And so Pascal's point is all these philosophers are trying to make God not seem foolish to those who are perishing, but that's not going to happen because God said that the gospel would be foolish to those who don't believe. So what his thing is just to say, look, how much better is it to bet on eternal, infinite happiness and joy than it is to bet on just this world? Like, which bet would you make? So he makes this, his famous Pascal's wager. And sometimes your throat gets more dry than other times, and I'm having a hard time today. Anyways, so he starts by saying that, just talking about God and who God is. So this is different than some of the other, like, this is distinctly different from someone like Eleanor Stump, and obviously Stump came much later, but her writing is very philosophically heavy, and Pascal's is focused more on who God is as revealed in the Bible than it is about, like, the God of the philosophers. So he starts by talking about the justice of God. And he just says that the justice of God must be as enormous as his mercy. The justice he shows to the damned is less enormous and should shock us less than the mercy he shows to the elect. We know that there is an infinite, and we are ignorant of its nature. Similarly, we know it is false that the series of numbers is finite, and it is therefore true that there is an infinite number. This is where he gets philosophical. But we do not know what it is. It is false that it is even, it is false that it is odd, for by adding a unit, the infinite does not change its nature. Yet it is a number, and every number is even or odd. This may be truly understood of every finite number. Thus, we can perfectly well recognize that there is a God without knowing what he is. So, he uses the example of numbers because he's a mathematician. I almost said mathematician. Anyways, so he uses numbers and he says, we know that there's an infinite amount of numbers, but we don't know, we know that there's an infinite amount of numbers exists, but we don't know the nature of an infinite number. So he says kind of the same is with God, except that we can't even understand that God's infinite nature exists. Not that we don't know, but we can't comprehend the existence of the nature of God because he doesn't have extension or limits. Numbers at least have extension. God doesn't, and extension means like physical representation, kind of. So God doesn't have extension, and he doesn't have any limit. So he's like infinity in that he doesn't have limit, the number, but he's not like it because he doesn't have extension at all. So it's not by us knowing his nature that we believe in him, but it's by faith in his existence. So he says, by faith we know his existence, and in glory we will come to know his nature. So we don't know his nature now, but we will come to know his nature. So he says, if there is a God, he is infinitely beyond our comprehension, since having neither parts nor limits, he bears no relation to us. We are thus incapable of knowing either what he is or if he is. So he basically says, we can't prove that God exists. So kind of talking about what we were talking about earlier with like the readings that we read last week didn't prove that God exists. So then we have to decide, is it reasonable to believe in God? So he then says, who then will blame Christians for not being able to provide reasons for their belief? This is what I was talking about earlier. Since they profess a religion for which they cannot provide a rational basis. In proclaiming it to the world, they declare it is folly. So Christians declare that the gospel is folly or foolish to those who don't believe. So how are they to provide a rational basis for the world for why God exists if it is, if the gospel is foolish? So, he says we have two choices. We either say that God is or that he is not. Two choices. And it's almost like gambling. And he also points out that reason can't settle anything here, which is interesting. So he's talking about epistemic rationality. Epistemic reason has no place here because we can't fully prove it. So this is where he introduces his wager argument. It says, a game is being played at the far end of this infinite distance. The coin will come down heads or tails. How will you bet? Reason will not enable you to decide either way or rule out either alternative. So reason is not going to help you decide if God is or if God is not. That's Pascal's argument, which is interesting because it's much different than the philosophers before him and most after. It's kind of a unique look at it. So reason isn't going to help you, and by that he means epistemic reason. So he's going to move to practical reason. So if you... Now, I have heard this, a iteration of this same argument, but in like a very basic way. Like I've heard people say before, like, if you believe in God and he's not real, then you lost nothing. If you believe in God and he is real, then you've gained everything. I'm sure you've heard some sort of variation of that in your life. at least like maybe since you've been in Arkansas if you're not from the South. This is, I mean, Pascal made that argument first, pretty much. His is a little more nuanced than that. But it's basically like, if God is real and you don't believe in him, then you will spend an eternity in hell. If God is real and you do believe in him, then you get infinite happiness and joy and awesomeness. So if you present it to someone like that, it's like, no brainer. I'm not going to risk spending eternity in hell, so yeah, I'll go ahead and make a guess that could be wrong about God existing. That's, and the way I just said that sounds careless. Pascal is not being careless in the way that he's thinking. But, I mean, that's, I don't know. So, he talks about, let's see, that whenever we are incapable of believing, that inability to believe comes from passion, not reason. So if we think like, oh, like I've thought long and hard about this and I just can't find any evidence for why God exists, he would say that that's not actually your reason coming to that conclusion, that it's your passions or emotions, because reason can't conclude whether God is or is not real. He's established that from the beginning, that reason is not going to do the trick here for you. So if you argue with Pascal based on epistemic reason, then you're going to fail, because that's not what he's talking about. He shifts gears to talk about practical reason, and he doesn't like explicitly say epistemic reason versus practical reason, but hopefully you can see what he's doing here, where epistemic is what he means when he says reason, and passions is and like the betting situation is the practical reason. But he's not using the word reason when it comes to that. He only uses the word reason when he's talking about epistemic reason. Hope that wasn't confusing. I got lost my place in my mind. So, it's a pretty simple, short argument. It's that there won't be harm if you believe in God and he's not real. And there will be harm if you don't believe in God and he is real. So you should put your bet on believing in God. That's the wager thing. Put your wager there. So the prize of belief is an infinity of infinitely happy life. So he believes that God is ultimate joy and happiness, and like Eleanor Stump, heaven would be union with this infinite and joyful God. Happy, that would be an infinitely happy life. So you'd be foolish not to place your bet on that, is what he would say. So he ends his little passage by saying, "Now what harm will come to you if you make this choice? You will be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, a doer of good works, a good friend, sincere, and true." So if you choose to believe in God, he's talking about the Christian God, the results of believing in God are that you will be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, a doer of good works, a good friend, sincere, and true, because that's what the Bible tells you to be, I suppose. And so, like, if believing in God makes you a better person on earth anyways, and you have the chance of going to heaven, like, boy, sign me up, right? That's what he wants you to say. So And he says, admittedly, you will not dwell amid tainted pleasures in glory and luxury, but will you not have others? I tell you that you will be the gainer in this life, and that on every step you take on this path you will see such certainty of gain and such emptiness of what you hazard, that you will finally know that what you have wagered for is something certain and infinite, and what you have given in exchange is nothing. So you've sacrificed nothing by wagering for a belief in God. Super interesting. Super interesting. Paper topic idea as well. Write about it. Next lecture we'll talk about somebody who wrote about Pascal's theory that works in probability and decision theory, so that'll be very interesting. We're not going to talk about William James, but one thing, he is in the book if you wanted to read him, but I mean, he agrees with Pascal in a sense, but Pascal puts a lot of weight on like the afterlife and having an eternity with God. And James argues that we should, like, believing in God brings so much pleasure in this life, just knowing who God is. And I don't think Pascal would disagree with that. But he does seem to put more weight on after we die. Yeah, so that's just, if you're interested, you could write your paper about James and Pascal and which one has the better argument or whatever. So I hope this was interesting and fun. I don't know what you kids think is fun, but yeah, just be sure to let me know if you have any questions about your paper proposal or paper in general. And yeah, we'll talk about it. I'll start grading your assignments for the week, and it'll be great. I hope everyone is being safe and having fun out there. And I'll see you next time.